She stood trembling at the altar, a fragile peace offering given to a monster. The Alpha King thought he had claimed a terrified human bride. He didn't know the silver pins in her hair were dipped in wolfsbane, and she was counting the seconds until she slit his throat. The winter of 1342 was brutal, but the cold biting at Adelaide Mercer's skin was nothing compared to the ice in her veins. She sat in the back of the iron-reinforced carriage, dressed in layers of heavy white velvet and spun lace. The men outside, and to the terrified Lord William Harrington, sitting across from her. She was Lady Catherine, a desperate, illegitimate niece offered as a blood tribute to spare the human settlements from slaughter. In truth, Lady Catherine had died of a fever a month prior. Adelaide had taken her place. "You must not look him in the eyes," Lord Harrington whispered, his gloved hands shaking so violently that the carriage lanterns flickered in the draught. "Alistair Vane is not a man. He is a plague wearing human skin. If he smells your fear, he will devour you before we even reach the borders of High Reach." Adelaide lowered her head, forcing her breathing into the erratic, shallow rhythm of a panicked noblewoman. "I understand, my lord." She didn't need Harrington's warnings. Adelaide knew exactly what Alistair Vane was. She was a prime operative of the Order of St. Jude, a clandestine guild of hunters that had waged a shadow war against the lycanthrope packs for 3 centuries. Underneath the heavy skirts of her wedding gown, strapped to her thighs, were twin daggers carved from the bone of an alpha she had slain 2 winters ago. Woven into the intricate embroidery of her bodice were threads of pure, consecrated silver. Even the perfume she wore, heavy rose and jasmine, was a calculated choice to mask the scent of the deadly nightshade powder dusted on her collarbone. The carriage lurched to a halt. The howling wind outside seemed to fall dead, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. "God preserve us," Harrington choked out, crossing himself. The heavy iron door was wrenched open, tearing off its hinges with a sickening screech of metal. The biting blizzard rushed in, and there, silhouetted against the blinding white snow, stood the Alpha King. Alistair Vane was a mountain of a man. He didn't wear the thick furs the human nobles needed to survive the northern freeze. His broad chest was barely covered by a leather tunic, revealing pale, scarred skin that radiated unnatural heat. His hair was dark, falling around a jawline that looked carved from granite, and his eyes were a piercing, luminescent amber. They were the eyes of an apex predator. "The tribute." Alistair's voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of the carriage. It wasn't a question. Lord Harrington practically shoved Adelaide forward, scrambling backward into the corner. "Yes, Your Grace." "Lady Catherine, as agreed in the Treaty of the Red Valley, our lands are safe?" Alistair didn't spare the Lord a single glance. His amber eyes were locked onto Adelaide. He reached out a massive, calloused hand. Adelaide played her part perfectly. She let out a soft, broken gasp, her hands trembling as she reached out and placed her small, pale fingers into his grasp. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of static electricity snapped between them. Alistair's eyes widened slightly, a flash of something unreadable crossing his feral features, before he pulled her out into the snow. "Your lands are safe, human," Alistair said, lifting Adelaide onto a massive midnight black warhorse as if she weighed no more than a bundle of kindling, provided the bride survives the winter. As the werewolf party turned back toward the treacherous mountain pass, Adelaide pressed her face into Alistair's heavy cloak. The smell of pine, old blood, and raw power invaded her senses. He was the most dangerous beast she had ever been tasked with killing. Her orders from the Order were absolute. Infiltrate the pack. Wait for the night of the blood moon, when the pack's elders would gather in the great hall, and slip a concentrated lethal dose of liquid silver into the communal wine casket. She was a suicide asset. She was not expected to walk out of High Reach Castle alive. "Stop shaking, little bird," Alistair murmured over the roaring wind, his chest rumbling against her back. "I don't kill things that don't bare their teeth at me." If only you knew, Adelaide thought, letting out a perfectly timed, terrified sob. "I have sharper teeth than any wolf in your pack." High Reach Castle was a fortress of dark stone carved directly into the side of a jagged mountain. It was raw, brutal, and teeming with monsters. As Alistair carried Adelaide through the massive ironwood doors, hundreds of eyes tracked her every movement. She could hear the low, guttural growls of the pack, the scratching of claws on stone, and the heavy sniffs as they memorized her scent. To them, she was a walking piece of meat. To her, they were targets. Adelaide kept her eyes downcast, but her mind was running a rapid tactical assessment. 70 wolves in the main hall. 3 sentries on the upper balcony. The stone pillars provide excellent cover, but the exits are bottlenecked. My king. A tall, lean man with ash-blonde hair stepped forward, blocking their path. His eyes were cold, scanning Adelaide with blatant disgust. This was Gideon, Alistair's beta and the second most dangerous wolf in the territory. "You actually brought the human pestilence into our home. I thought Harrington would double-cross us." "Harrington is a coward. He values his pulse more than his pride," Alistair replied, finally setting Adelaide down on her feet. She swayed perfectly, pretending the altitude and fear were making her faint. Alistair's hand shot out, steadying her waist. His grip was entirely too gentle for a creature that could snap her spine with a flick of his wrist. "She smells strange." Gideon leaned in, his nose twitching. Adelaide's heart skipped a beat. If he smelled the bone blades, she would have to kill them both right here, and she wouldn't make it to the gates. "She smells like fear and cheap human perfume," Alistair interrupted, stepping between Gideon and Adelaide. A low, warning growl vibrated in the Alpha's throat. "She is my bride, Gideon, claimed by the ancient law. She is under my protection. Any wolf who bares their fangs at her will answer to me. Am I clear?" The tension in the hall spiked. Gideon lowered his head, baring his neck in a begrudging show of submission. "Crystal clear, Alpha." The wedding feast was held that very night. There were no vows, no priests. By werewolf law, breaking bread and drinking from the Alpha's cup cemented the bond in the eyes of the pack. Adelaide sat rigidly at the high table next to Alistair, surrounded by raucous laughter, tearing of raw meat, and the overwhelming stench of wild beasts. She observed Alistair closely. He wasn't the mindless savage the Order's archives had claimed. He broke his own portion of roasted venison and pushed the best, most tender cuts onto her plate. When a drunk, aggressive wolf stumbled too close to the high table, Alistair didn't yell. He merely flashed his eyes amber, and the wolf scurried away, whining. He ruled with absolute authority, but there was a strange, burdened weariness to him. "Don't humanize him," Adelaide scolded herself. "He is a monster. Remember the villages of the lower valley. Remember the blood in the snow. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the great hall blasted open. The wind howled into the room, extinguishing half the torches in an instant. Silence fell. Then the smell of rotting meat and stagnant water hit Adelaide's nose. Rogues, a pack of feral, exiled wolves, flooded into the hall. They were massive, starved, and driven entirely by madness. Chaos erupted. Screams of women and children mixed with the terrifying sound of bones cracking and wolves shifting into their monstrous half-beast forms. Alistair was on his feet in a microsecond, roaring a command that shook the dust from the rafters. He didn't shift fully. His claws extended into lethal, curved scythes, and his teeth elongated as he vaulted over the table, tearing into the front line of the rogues. He was a force of nature, ripping throats and snapping necks with brutal efficiency. Adelaide ducked under the heavy oak table, her hands flying to the slits in her skirt, gripping the hilts of her bone blades. Her mind raced. This is perfect. If the rogues kill him, my job is done. I just need to slip away in the chaos. But as she watched the carnage unfold, she saw the reality of the situation. If Alistair died, the treaty was void. The Silver Pines pack would fracture, the surviving wolves would scatter, and they would unleash an apocalyptic bloodbath on the human settlements in retaliation. Millions would die. Alistair had to live, at least until the blood moon, so she could kill the entire leadership at once. Through the chaos, Adelaide saw a massive, scarred rogue scaling one of the stone pillars, perfectly positioned above Alistair's blind spot, while the Alpha was busy fighting 3 others. The rogue lunged, jaws snapping toward the back of Alistair's neck. Instinct overrode Adelaide's cover. She slid out from under the table, her hand blurring to her hair. She ripped out a 6-inch wolfsbane-dipped silver hairpin. With a flick of her wrist, executing a throwing technique mastered over a decade of brutal training, she launched the pin. The silver needle caught the firelight for a fraction of a second before burying itself deep into the rogue's eye mid-air. The beast let out a shrieking yelp, its trajectory faltering. It crashed into the stone floor, right at Alistair's feet, dead before its heart stopped beating, its veins instantly turning black from the potent poison. Alistair spun around, panting heavily, covered in gore. He looked at the dead rogue, then at the silver pin protruding from its eye socket. Slowly, he traced the trajectory of the throw, his glowing amber eyes lifting through the smoky hall until they locked onto Adelaide. She stood by the high table, her dress stained with spilled wine, breathing heavily. She quickly dropped her hands and widened her eyes, feigning paralyzed terror, shrinking back against the stone wall. Alistair stared at her. The feral rage in his eyes slowly faded into a cold, piercing suspicion. He looked from the dead, poisoned rogue back to his fragile human bride. He didn't say a word, but the message in his eyes was clear. I know what you did. The heavy oak doors of the Alpha's chambers slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous room. Adelaide stood near the roaring fireplace, her ruined wedding dress stiff with dried wine and rogue blood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She had already slipped the twin bone blades from her thigh holsters. They were concealed perfectly within the folds of her skirt. Alistair stood by the door. He had stripped off his blood-soaked leather tunic, revealing a torso painted with fresh, steaming gashes that were already knitting themselves back together. He didn't move toward her. He simply watched her with those glowing, predatory eyes. "A perfect throw," Alistair said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. 40 feet, through terrible lighting, hitting a moving target the size of a coin. Not bad for a terrified, illegitimate niece who has never left the human capital. Adelaide kept her chin tucked, calculating the distance between them. 3 steps to close the gap. A feint to the left, strike the femoral artery, then drive the second blade up into the base of the skull. "I do not know what you mean, my lord," Adelaide whispered, forcing a tremor into her voice. It was a lucky toss. I was aiming for the beast's chest. I panicked." Alistair chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. He crossed the room slowly, pouring himself a goblet of dark wine from a silver pitcher. "Drop the act, Adelaide. Or should I call you by your operative title? Ghost of the Northern Wastes. The Order of St. Jude's most lethal weapon." The air in the room vanished. The fabricated terror melted from Adelaide's face, replaced by cold, absolute stillness. She didn't ask how he knew her name. A hunter never wasted breath on questions that didn't provide a tactical advantage. In a blur of motion, Adelaide whipped her arm forward. The bone blade sang through the air, aimed directly for Alistair's throat. I didn't even flinch. He caught the blade mere millimeters from his jugular, the sharpened bone biting deeply into his palm. Blood dripped onto the stone floor, hissing slightly. He didn't break eye contact. "I could have killed you in the carriage," Alistair said softly, tossing the blade onto the heavy wooden bed frame. "I could have let Gideon tear you apart in the courtyard. Do you really think I didn't smell the wolfsbane on your skin the second I touched your hand at the border?" Adelaide drew her second blade, her stance shifting into a flawless, lethal fighting form. "Then why am I breathing, monster?" Alistair took a step forward, ignoring her weapon. "Because I need you, and because Commander Arthur Pendleton is playing us both for fools." The name hit Adelaide like a physical blow. Commander Arthur Pendleton was the Grand Master of the Order of St. Jude. He was the man who had raised her from an orphan, the man who had placed the silver pins in her hair and ordered her to poison the pack. "Pendleton wants a war," Alistair explained, tossing a crumpled, wax-sealed parchment onto the table between them. "I intercepted this missive a fortnight ago. It was sent from Pendleton to my beta, Gideon. They have formed an alliance. Gideon wants my throne, and Pendleton wants the Treaty of the Red Valley shattered, so the human armies have a justification to march north and claim the silver mines in our mountains." Adelaide stared at the parchment. She recognized Pendleton's sharp, angular handwriting. The seal of St. Jude was undeniable. "Gideon orchestrated the rogue attack tonight to test my defenses," Alistair continued, leaning heavily against the table. "He plans to stage a coup on the night of the blood moon. Pendleton's forces are already marching through the valley, waiting for the signal. Gideon is supposed to kill me, open the gates, and let the Order slaughter my people. Women, children, elders, all of them." Adelaide's world-view fractured. The Order was founded to protect the innocent from beasts. They were the shield of humanity. But to orchestrate a massacre, to ally with a rogue werewolf for political gain and silver. "You were sent here as a distraction," Alistair said, his voice softening, holding a trace of empathy that entirely disarmed her. "You were meant to poison the wine, yes. But Pendleton knew you wouldn't survive the retaliation. You are a suicide pawn, Adelaide. A loose end he wanted tied up." "You're lying," Adelaide hissed, though the certainty in her voice was crumbling. "Am I?" Alistair stepped into her personal space. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. He reached out, gently pressing his bleeding hand over the hand that held her knife, pushing the blade down until it rested against his own chest, directly over his heart. If I am lying, plunge that blade into my heart right now. End the war. But if you know in your soul that I am speaking the truth, then we have 3 days until the blood moon to figure out how to save both our peoples. Adelaide looked up into his amber eyes. She saw no deception, no feral madness. She saw a king desperately trying to protect his people. She slowly lowered the blade. "What is your plan?" she asked, her voice returning to its natural, icy cadence. Alistair smiled, a dangerous, thrilling expression that made Adelaide's pulse jump. "We are going to let them spring their trap. And then, my beautiful assassin, we are going to show them exactly why they should fear the dark." The night of the blood moon bathed High Reach Castle in a sinister crimson glow. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, pine needles, and the electric tension of a pack ready to honor their ancient rites. The great hall was packed to the brim. At the center of the room sat the grand ceremonial wine casket, steeped with the rarest spices. Adelaide stood by the high table, dressed in a stunning gown of midnight blue silk. She looked every inch the Luna, the queen of the pack. But hidden beneath the silk were throwing knives, vials of paralytic toxins, and a reinforced leather corset. Alistair sat beside her, radiating quiet authority. They had spent the last 3 days mapping out every inch of the hall, coordinating a counter-ambush with a select group of Alistair's most trusted guards. Adelaide had discovered a terrifying truth during those 3 days. She didn't hate Alistair. In fact, she respected him. He was honorable, fiercely loyal, and protective. As they trained together in the castle's armory, their dynamic had shifted from enemies to partners, sparking a fierce, undeniable chemistry that culminated in a stolen, breathless kiss in the shadows of the battlements. She was fighting for him tonight, not for the Order. "It is time," Gideon announced, stepping up to the center of the hall. He held a golden goblet, his eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. "The Luna must pour the first cup to honor the ancestors and bless the pack." Adelaide stood gracefully. She walked down the stone steps toward the heavy wooden casket. Gideon watched her with barely concealed triumph. He believed she had followed her original orders and spiked the barrel with liquid silver. I was expecting the entire upper echelon of the pack, including Alistair, to drop dead within minutes, leaving him to take command and open the gates for the Order. She picked up the heavy silver ladle and poured the deep red wine into Gideon's goblet. "To the future of the Silver Pines pack," Adelaide said, holding the goblet out to the beta. Gideon smirked. "To the future." He turned to Alistair. "Alpha, drink with us." Alistair stepped down, taking a goblet of his own. Adelaide poured it. "Drink, Gideon," Alistair commanded softly. Gideon hesitated. He knew the wine was supposed to be poisoned. "The Alpha first." "I insist," Alistair said, his eyes flashing amber. Realizing he was cornered, Gideon made a split-second decision. He threw the goblet to the ground and roared. The sound was a deafening, terrifying call to arms. Instantly, the heavy iron doors of the great hall were blown open with explosive force. Hundreds of heavily armed soldiers, wearing the silver and crimson tabards of the Order of St. Jude, poured into the room, wielding repeating crossbows loaded with silver bolts. Leading the charge was Captain Reginald Mercer, Adelaide's own uncle, a ruthless zealot who had trained her to be a killer. "Kill the beasts!" Reginald bellowed, levelling his sword at Alistair. "Burn it all to the ground!" "Treason!" Alistair roared, his body exploding in a violent shift. In seconds, he was no longer a man, but a massive, 9-foot-tall dire wolf with midnight fur and jaws capable of snapping steel. The hall erupted into absolute pandemonium. Gideon shifted, launching himself at Alistair, while the traitorous wolves in Gideon's faction turned on their own packmates. The Order's soldiers fired volley after volley of silver bolts into the fray. Adelaide didn't hesitate. She ripped the long slit of her dress open for mobility, drawing her bone blades. A soldier from the Order charged her, raising a broadsword. "Lady Adelaide, step aside," the soldier yelled, recognizing her. "I don't think so," Adelaide replied. She ducked under his wild swing, sweeping his legs out from under him, and struck him in the temple with the heavy pommel of her blade, knocking him unconscious. She was not here to kill her former comrades, but she would not let them slaughter innocents. She moved through the chaos like a ghost. She disarmed hunters, shattered crossbow mechanisms with precise throws of her heavy silver hairpins, and shielded terrified wolf pups, pushing them toward the secret tunnels she and Alistair had prepared. Across the room, Alistair and Gideon were locked in a titanic, bloody clash. Claws tore through flesh, and deafening snarls shook the masonry. Gideon was fast, fueled by dark magic and desperation, but Alistair was the Alpha King for a reason. With a brutal, earth-shattering tackle, Alistair pinned Gideon to the floor, his massive jaws closing around the traitor's throat, ending the coup in a sickening crunch. But Alistair had left his flank exposed. Captain Reginald Mercer stood on the high table balcony, leveling a massive, heavy-duty repeating crossbow directly at Alistair's back. The bolt was tipped with pure, unadulterated liquid silver, a guaranteed kill shot. "Alistair!" Adelaide screamed. She was too far away to push him. She had no throwing knives left. Instinct, honed by a decade of combat, took over. Adelaide sprinted, launching herself off a stone pillar and diving through the air just as Reginald pulled the trigger. The silver bolt tore through the air. Adelaide threw her body into its path. Thwack! The bolt struck Adelaide high in the shoulder, ripping through muscle and embedding itself deep in the stone wall behind her. The sheer force of the impact spun her in the air, and she crashed onto the hard stone floor in a tangle of blue silk and blood. The battlefield went dead silent. Alistair dropped Gideon's lifeless body. He shifted back to his human form, ignoring his own wounds, and let out a raw, agonizing scream that tore the breath from every living thing in the room. "Adelaide!" He crossed the room in a blur, sliding to his knees beside her. Blood was pooling beneath her shoulder rapidly. Reginald Mercer looked down from the balcony in shock. "Adelaide, what have you done? You betrayed your own blood." Alistair looked up, his amber eyes burning with a blinding, godlike fury. He didn't speak. He grabbed a silver spear from a fallen guard and hurled it with the force of a ballista. The spear impaled Reginald through the chest, pinning the corrupt captain to the heavy oak doors of the hall. The remaining forces of the Order, seeing their commander dead and their ambush failing, dropped their weapons in terror. The battle was over. Alistair carefully scooped Adelaide into his arms, his hands shaking as he applied pressure to her wound. "Stay with me, little bird. Look at me. Do not close your eyes." Adelaide coughed, a weak, breathless laugh escaping her lips. "I told you, I have sharper teeth than your wolves." "You are a foolish, stubborn woman," Alistair choked out, pressing his forehead against hers. "Get the healer, now!" he roared to the surviving pack members. "You didn't let me finish my job," Adelaide whispered, her vision fading at the edges. "I was supposed to kill the Alpha." Alistair pulled her tighter against his chest, uncaring of the blood ruining his skin. "You already did, Adelaide. The moment I met you in the snow, you killed the monster, and you claimed the man." Adelaide survived. The silver bolt had missed her vital organs by a fraction of an inch. When she finally woke, 3 days later, she found herself not in a cold stone cell, but in the massive royal bed of the Alpha King, wrapped in thick furs, with Alistair sleeping in a chair beside her, his hand wrapped firmly around hers. The betrayal of Commander Arthur Pendleton was exposed to the human capital. Lord William Harring, terrified of Alistair's wrath, provided the treasonous documents to the human king, completely dismantling the corrupt leadership of the Order of St. Jude. Adelaide did not return to the human world. She had spent her life hunting monsters, only to find that the truest monsters wore holy robes and commanded from comfortable towers. She stayed in High Reach Castle, not as a tribute, not as a terrified bride, but as the true Luna of the Silver Pines pack. She trained their warriors, she fortified their defenses, and she ruled beside the Alpha King, a deadly hunter who had finally found a pack of her own. What an absolutely epic finale. Adelaide went from a deadly assassin, hiding in plain sight, to the fierce Luna willing to take a silver bolt for the very king she was sent to destroy. Did you expect Commander Pendleton to be the real villain behind the treaty, or did Gideon's betrayal catch you off guard? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments. If you loved this story, smash that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe